Sometimes hope is all a parent has left when the world keeps taking everything else away. Amon knew that feeling well as he stood in front of the old house on Maple Street, praying this time things would be different. The house needed work, but it was finally his. Then he saw the note on the attic door. "Don't open the attic." He thought it was just an old warning, maybe a joke. One afternoon, he opened it anyway. Sunlight poured through the skylight onto chests filled with gold coins and old treasures. There were journals, too, left by a man who wanted his fortune to help someone who needed it. But would this discovery save Amon's family? Or had he just opened a door that should have stayed closed? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, subscribe, because tomorrow something special awaits you. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window of the old house on Maple Street, catching dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits welcoming their new residents. Amon stood at the counter, spreading peanut butter across wheat bread with the careful precision of a man who'd learned to make every dollar stretch. His daughter Kira sat at the small wooden table behind him, swinging her legs and humming a tune she'd learned in music class. "Daddy, can I have the crust cut off?" she asked, her voice carrying that hopeful lilt children use when they know the answer might be no. Amon turned, saw those bright eyes, so much like her mother's, and felt his heart squeeze. "Sure thing, sweetheart. But you know what? The crust is where all the strength lives. That's what makes you grow tall and brave." Kira considered this with the seriousness only an 8-year-old could muster. "Okay, I'll eat it then. I want to be tall like you." He smiled, finished making her lunch, and tucked it into the faded blue lunchbox they'd had for 3 years. The clasp was loose, held together with electrical tape, but it still worked. That was the measure of things in Amon's world. Did it still work? If yes, you kept it. If no, you fixed it. Replacing things was a luxury for people who hadn't spent the last 3 years clawing their way back from rock bottom. 3 years since Sarah died. 3 years since the cancer took her, left him with a daughter to raise alone, medical bills that crushed him like stones, and a grief so profound it sometimes felt like drowning. He'd sold their nice house in the suburbs, moved to a cramped apartment, worked the night shift at Henderson's warehouse while doing handyman jobs on weekends. Every penny went to keeping them afloat, keeping Kira in school, keeping food on the table. But this house, this old, creaking house on Maple Street, this was supposed to be their fresh start. "Come on, kiddo. Time to head out." Amon grabbed his keys from the counter, the single key ring holding just 3 keys, house, car, and the storage unit where he kept Sarah's things he couldn't bear to part with yet. The drive to Riverside Elementary took 12 minutes through streets lined with modest homes where working families lived. These were neighborhoods where people mowed their own lawns, fixed their own fences, and waved to each other from porches in the evening. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. Amon appreciated that. "Will you pick me up today?" Kira asked as they pulled into the school drop-off lane. "I'll be here at 3 o'clock sharp," he promised. "Mrs. Chen said you've been doing great in reading." Kira beamed. "I finished another chapter book." "That's my girl." He leaned over, kissed her forehead. "I love you. Be good." "Love you too, Daddy." He watched her skip toward the entrance, her backpack bouncing against her small frame, and felt the familiar ache of pride mixed with worry. She deserved so much more than he could give her right now. But maybe finally, things were turning around. The house had been an unexpected opportunity. Amon had been scanning real estate listings for months, dreaming of something better than their cramped 2-bedroom apartment. When he saw the listing for 847 Maple Street, he'd nearly dismissed it. Houses in that neighborhood typically went for twice what he could afford. But the price was astonishingly low, almost suspicious. The real estate agent, a nervous man named Philip Sutton, had seemed eager to close the deal quickly. The previous owner passed away 2 years ago, Philip had explained during the showing. "Estate wants it sold. Clean title, no liens. It needs some cosmetic work, but it's structurally sound." Amon had walked through the house, noting the peeling wallpaper, the outdated fixtures, the worn hardwood floors that still held a certain dignity beneath their scratches. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a small backyard with an old oak tree. The kitchen appliances were ancient but functional. The roof looked newer than the rest of the house. Why so cheap? Amon had asked, suspicion creeping in. What's wrong with it? Philip had shifted uncomfortably. Nothing's wrong with it. The estate has specific instructions about the sale. They want it to go to someone who needs it, a family, someone of, well, modest means. That's unusual. The previous owner was an unusual man, Philip had replied. Look, I'm not supposed to say much, but Mr. Carver, that was his name, he left very specific instructions. The lawyer handling the estate is pretty strict about following them. You fit the criteria. You have a daughter, you're employed, you're not buying it as an investment property. If you want it, it's yours. Amon had walked through again, slower this time. He'd run his hand along the banister of the stairs, solid oak worn smooth by decades of use. He'd looked out the back window at that oak tree and imagined Kira reading beneath it on summer afternoons. He'd opened closet doors, checked under sinks, tested light switches. That's when he'd noticed the attic door in the upstairs hallway. It was different from the other doors, heavier, older, made of thick planks bound with iron straps. And taped to it, yellowed with age, was a note written in shaky handwriting. Don't open the attic. What's that about? Amon had asked. Philip had barely glanced at it. Old houses, old notes. Previous owner probably had storage up there he didn't want disturbed. You can remove it if you want, but Amon had left it. Something about it felt important, like a message across time. Besides, he had enough to worry about without concerning himself with a dusty attic. They'd closed on the house 3 weeks ago. The paperwork had been handled by a law firm downtown, Brennan and Associates. Amon had signed document after document, barely understanding half of it, just grateful to finally have a real home for Kira. Moving in had been simple since they didn't own much. The furniture from the apartment barely filled the living room. Kira had been ecstatic about having her own bedroom, dancing around the empty space and declaring where her bed would go, where she'd put her bookshelf, where she'd hang the drawings she'd made. Amon had spent the first week doing basic repairs, tightening loose doorknobs, replacing a cracked bathroom tile, patching nail holes in the walls. The work was familiar and satisfying. With each repair, the house felt more like theirs. His neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, had introduced herself on the second day. She was a widow in her 70s who'd lived on Maple Street for 43 years. She'd brought over a casserole and homemade cookies, her eyes twinkling with warmth. Welcome to the neighborhood, dear. It's good to see this house lived in again. Theodore would have liked you. Theodore, Mr. Carver, the previous owner. Lovely man. Kept to himself mostly, but always had a kind word. Lived here for 65 years, if you can believe it. Never married, no children, just him and his workshop in the basement. What did he do? Mrs. Abernathy's expression had turned thoughtful. He was a craftsman. Fix things. Beautiful work. Furniture, clocks, jewelry boxes. People came from all over to have him restore their heirlooms. He had a gift for bringing old things back to life. Amon had filed that information away. Intrigued by the man whose home he now inhabited, now, driving back from dropping Kira at school, Amon thought about his shift at the warehouse starting in 5 hours. He'd sleep for 3, maybe 4 hours if he was lucky, then get up and do it all over again. The night shift paid slightly better, and it allowed him to be present for Kira in the mornings and after school. His supervisor, a gruff but fair man named Bernard Foster, had been understanding about Amon's situation. Still, the exhaustion was constant. His body ached from lifting boxes. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, and his bank account remained stubbornly close to empty, despite his best efforts. But they had this house now. That had to count for something. That afternoon, after 3 hours of restless sleep, Amon stood in the upstairs hallway with a dust cloth and cleaning supplies. The house was quiet. Kira wouldn't be home for another hour. He'd decided to tackle the upstairs today, start making it feel less like a stranger's home and more like theirs. He cleaned the bathroom, wiped down the hallway baseboards, organized the linen closet. And then he stood in front of the attic door. The note was still there, its edges curling with age. Don't open the attic. Amon reached out, touched the paper. It was brittle, fragile. Who had written this? Theodore Carver himself, and why? What was up there that warranted a warning? Probably nothing. Old houses collected dust and memories in their attics. Boxes of forgotten belongings, old furniture, maybe some insulation that needed replacing. The note was probably just an old man's quirk, a joke or a reminder to himself. Still, Amon found himself curious. He'd owned the house for 3 weeks and hadn't even looked in the attic. It seemed foolish to avoid it forever based on a cryptic note. He reached for the handle. The door was locked, of course it was. Amon checked the key ring the real estate agent had given him. House key, mailbox key, basement key, but no attic key. He'd have to ask Philip about it, or maybe just replace the lock entirely. It was his house now. He had every right to see what was in his own attic. But as Amon turned away, heading downstairs to start dinner preparations, he couldn't shake the feeling that the note meant something more than he understood. That old warning, written in shaky handwriting by a man who'd lived alone for 65 years, felt less like a suggestion and more like a test, and Amon wasn't sure yet whether he wanted to pass or fail it. 2 weeks passed before Amon thought seriously about the attic again. Life had a way of demanding attention in more immediate ways. A leaking faucet that needed fixing, Kira's school requiring permission slips and project supplies, the relentless march of bills arriving in the mailbox like clockwork. Then came Tuesday. Tuesday started badly and got worse. The morning began with Kira's teacher, Mrs. Chen, mentioning the upcoming field trip to the Science Museum. $50 per student. Due by Friday. Amon had smiled, said he'd take care of it, and felt his stomach knot. $50 might as well have been $500. At the warehouse, Bernard called him into the office. "Amon, I need to talk to you about your hours." His heart sank. "Is there a problem?" "Company's cutting overtime. New policy from corporate. I tried to fight it, but..." Bernard shrugged helplessly. "Your paycheck's going to be lighter starting next week." Amon did the math in his head. Lighter paycheck meant no buffer, no room for unexpected expenses. "No field trip money, I understand," he said, because what else could he say? The afternoon brought the final blow. Driving home, his car, a 15-year-old sedan held together by prayers and duct tape, began making an ominous grinding sound. He pulled into a mechanic's shop, dreading the verdict. "Brake pads are shot," the mechanic said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Rotors need replacing, too." "You've been driving on borrowed time. How much?" "Parts and labor, probably $450. Maybe $500. Amon's credit card was declined when he tried to buy groceries that evening. He paid with the last cash in his wallet, leaving him with $23 to his name until Friday's paycheck, which would be smaller than usual and wouldn't cover the car repair or the field trip. He made dinner in silence, spaghetti with sauce from a jar, garlic bread from day-old bakery markdown. Kira chatted about her day, about the solar system model they were making in class, about how excited she was for the museum trip. Amon listened, smiled, and felt something crumbling inside his chest. After Kira went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, staring at his bank balance. The numbers didn't lie. He was broke. Worse than broke, he was drowning and the water kept rising. That's when his mother-in-law called. "Amon, dear, I was thinking Kira might like to spend the weekend with me. We could do some baking, maybe visit the park." "That would be great, Sandra. She'd love that. Is everything all right?" "You sound tired. Just a long day." "Thank you for taking her, really." After he hung up, Amon sat in the quiet house, feeling the weight of failure pressing down on him. He'd been so sure buying this house was the right move, the fresh start they needed. But what good was a house if he couldn't afford to keep them fed, keep the car running, give his daughter the normal childhood experiences every other kid got to have? He thought about Sarah. She'd been the strong one, the organized one, the one who always had a plan. She'd balanced their checkbook with military precision, found ways to stretch budgets, somehow made everything work. Without her, Amon felt like he was constantly one step away from disaster. The house creaked around him, settling into the night. Old houses did that, shifted and groaned and whispered with age. Amon found the sounds comforting usually, but tonight they felt accusatory. This house, this money pit of repairs and property taxes, might have been a mistake. He stood, restless, needing to move. He walked upstairs, past Kira's room, where she slept peacefully, unaware of her father's mounting panic. He paused in the hallway. The attic door stood before him, that yellowed note still taped to its surface. "Don't open the attic." Something about it struck him differently tonight. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was curiosity finally winning out. Maybe it was just needing something, anything, to distract him from the crushing weight of his financial reality. He'd never found a key, but looking at the door now, Amon noticed something he'd missed before. The lock was old, simple, the kind he could probably pick with a screwdriver and some patience. He'd learned basic lockpicking from YouTube videos when he'd locked himself out of the apartment last year. The tools were in the basement. It took him 10 minutes to retrieve them and return. The house remained quiet except for the steady rhythm of Kira's breathing from her room. Amon wedged the screwdriver into the keyhole, feeling for the pins. It was harder than the practice locks he'd tried, but after several minutes of careful work, he felt something give. The lock clicked open. He stood there, hand on the doorknob, suddenly hesitant. The note fluttered slightly in the draft from the heating vent. "Don't open the attic." Why? What was up there? Old boxes? Forgotten furniture? Asbestos insulation? Or something else? Amon turned the knob. The door opened with a groan of hinges that hadn't moved in years. Beyond lay a narrow staircase climbing into darkness. He found his phone, turned on the flashlight, and began to climb. The stairs were steep, the air growing warmer as he ascended. Dust swirled in his phone's beam, dancing particles that caught the light like snow. The smell was musty but not unpleasant, old wood and time and secrets. He reached the top step, and his flashlight beam swept across the attic, then stopped, then swept back, because what he was seeing couldn't be real. The attic was larger than he'd expected, running the full length of the house. A skylight had been installed in the roof, and even now, with only moonlight filtering through, he could see clearly enough. 5 wooden chests sat arranged in a semicircle in the center of the room. Not small chests. These were substantial, the kind you'd see in movies about pirates and treasure. They were closed, but unlocked. Amon's hands trembled as he approached. This was insane. There was nothing in these chests. There couldn't be. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. He opened the first chest. Gold coins spilled over the edge, glinting in his phone's light. Not just a few, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Different sizes, different designs, different eras. His mind couldn't process what he was seeing. The second chest held jewelry, necklaces, rings, brooches, all carefully wrapped in cloth. The third contained bundles of old currency, bills from decades past, bound with rubber bands that had long since deteriorated. The fourth chest was different. It held books, journals, leather-bound and handwritten. Amon pulled one out with shaking hands, opened it carefully. The first page, in neat handwriting, Journal of Theodore Carver, June 1952. If you're reading this, I'm gone. Good. This was meant for you. Amon sat down hard on the dusty floor, the journal open in his lap, his heart hammering so loudly he could hear it in his ears. This wasn't possible. People didn't just find treasure in their attics. This didn't happen in real life. It was a dream or a joke, or he reached out, touched the gold coins again. They were real, cold and heavy and undeniably real. The fifth chest sat unopened, but Amon couldn't move toward it yet. His mind was spinning too fast, trying to understand, trying to process what this meant. Was this legal? Could he keep this? Who did it belong to? The house was his, and everything in it, according to the sale documents. But surely there were rules about something like this. Inheritance laws, taxes. Somebody would want this back. His phone buzzed, making him jump. A text from Sandra. Kira's all packed for the weekend. See you Friday evening when I drop her off. Friday. 2 days away. 2 days to figure out what to do about this impossible discovery. Amon looked around the attic again, at the chests of gold and jewelry and old money, at the journals that promised answers. The moonlight through the skylight cast everything in silver, making it all seem even more unreal. He thought about the note on the door. Don't open the attic. Was it a warning or a test? Had Theodore Carver known someone would eventually ignore it, and had he wanted them to? Amon picked up the journal again, turning pages carefully. Entry after entry, dated and detailed. Theodore's life recorded in his own hand. His work, his thoughts, his decisions. One entry caught Amon's eye, dated December 1965. I've saved carefully, lived simply. But what good is wealth if it dies with you? Money should flow like water. It should nourish and give life. Hoarded, it only stagnates. Another entry from 2010. I'm 79 now. No family, no heirs. I've thought long about what to do with everything I've accumulated. Banks, charities? Neither feels right. This wealth should go to someone who needs it. Someone who would understand its value because they've known its absence. Amon's eyes filled with tears. He didn't know why he was crying. Relief, fear, disbelief, all of it mixed together into something overwhelming. The $50 for Kira's field trip, the $500 for the car repair, the mounting bills and the shrinking paycheck, and the constant grinding stress of trying to keep them afloat. All of it suddenly felt distant, like problems from another life. But could he really keep this? Was it truly his? He needed answers. Legal answers. Ethical answers. Real answers. Amon closed the journal, stood up and looked at the 5 chests one more time. Then he walked back down the attic stairs, closing the door behind him, leaving the note where it had always been. Don't open the attic. Too late for that now. He'd opened it. And whatever came next, whatever consequences or complications or miracles followed, he'd deal with them, because for the first time in 3 years, Amon felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Amon didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around him, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw gold coins glinting in moonlight, felt the weight of those journals in his hands, heard Theodore Carver's words echoing across the years. This wealth should go to someone who needs it. By dawn, Amon had made a decision. He wouldn't touch anything in the attic until he understood the full picture. No spending, no moving anything, no telling anyone. First, he needed to know who Theodore Carver really was, and whether this fortune came with strings attached. After dropping Kira at school, he drove to the public library instead of going home to sleep. The building was quiet, nearly empty at this hour. The librarian at the reference desk, a woman in her 60s named Phyllis, looked up with a welcoming smile. "Can I help you find something? I'm researching someone who used to live in my house. Theodore Carver. He died about 2 years ago." Phyllis's expression brightened with recognition. "Oh, Mr. Carver. Wonderful man. He came here every Saturday for years, always reading books about history and craftsmanship." She stood, gesturing for him to follow. "Let me show you the local archives." She led him to a back room where old newspapers and town records were stored, some digitized, others still in their original form. "What specifically are you looking for?" "Anything about his life, his work. I just want to understand who he was." "Well, you're in luck. Mr. Carver was featured in the town newsletter several times. Let me pull those for you." An hour later, Amon sat surrounded by printouts and photocopies, piecing together Theodore Carver's life. The picture that emerged was of a quiet, meticulous man who devoted himself to his craft with almost monastic dedication. 1987 article titled "Local Craftsman Keeps History." Alive featured a photograph of Theodore in his basement workshop. He was thin, with careful hands and gentle eyes that seemed to look past the camera into some distant point. The article described his reputation for exquisite restoration, work on antique furniture and timepieces. People come from 3 counties away to have Mr. Carver restore their family heirlooms. The reporter had written, "His waiting list is over a year long, but clients say it's worth the wait. He doesn't just fix things," one customer explained. "He brings them back to life." A 1995 piece mentioned Theodore donating anonymously to the library's restoration fund. The library director had discovered the donor's identity only by accident and praised his quiet generosity. More recent articles were brief. Theodore receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award from the County Historical Society in 2008. A short obituary in 2023, noting his death at age 94, with no surviving family members. Amon copied everything, thanked Phyllis, and spent his lunch break at a coffee shop researching on his phone. He searched property records, obituaries, anything he could find online. Theodore Carver had purchased 847 Maple Street in 1950 for $8,500. He'd lived there for 65 years, never married, no children. His estate had been handled by Brennan and Associates, a small law firm downtown. The pieces were falling into place, but Amon still had questions. Big questions. Like where had Theodore gotten enough wealth to fill 5 chests with gold and jewelry? That evening, exhausted from lack of sleep but too wired to rest, Amon made Kira dinner and helped her pack for her weekend with Sandra. After they left, he stood in the hallway staring at the attic door. The note seemed to mock him now. Don't open the attic. He'd opened it. No turning back. He climbed the stairs again, this time with better lighting, a camping lantern he'd found in the basement. The attic looked different in the bright LED glow. Less magical, more real. The chests sat exactly where he'd left them. Amon opened the 4th chest again, pulling out more journals. There were 7 in total, spanning decades. He chose the earliest one, dated 1952, and began reading systematically. Theodore's writing was precise, almost formal. The early entries described his arrival in America from Belgium after World War II. He'd worked as an apprentice watchmaker, saving every penny, sleeping in a rented room barely large enough for a bed. June 3rd, 1952. Purchased the house today. It needs work, but it's mine. A man should own something in this world, something that can't be taken away. August 17, 1952, first major restoration commission, a grandfather clock from the 1840s. The mechanism is exquisite. I could spend a lifetime studying such craftsmanship and never master it completely. December 20th, 1952, I live on very little. Mrs. Patterson down the street worries I don't eat enough. But I don't need much. What I need is time to work, space to think, and the satisfaction of doing something well. The entries continued year after year. Theodore documented his growing reputation, his increasing commissions, his careful management of finances. He lived frugally, invested wisely, and gave generously, though he never mentioned the recipients by name. April 8, 1965. Helped a young veteran today. He came asking if I could fix his father's watch, all he had left of the man. No money to pay. I told him the watch was already fixed. Sometimes the best compensation is seeing someone smile. November 12, 1973. My savings have grown beyond what I need. What use is money to a man who lives simply? I've begun thinking about how to use it well. Then Amon found something that made his breath catch. A separate entry, written on loose paper tucked between the journal pages, January 30th, 1985. I am 56 years old and I realize now that I will likely die alone. No wife, no children, no one to inherit what I've built. This doesn't sadden me, I chose this life. But it does raise a question. What becomes of everything when I'm gone? The entry continued on another page. I could leave it to charity, but charities are impersonal. They help many, but touch few. I could leave it to the government, but governments are wasteful. I want this wealth, earned through honest work and careful saving, to help someone directly, someone who needs it, someone who will understand its value. Amon set the journal down, his hands trembling slightly. He opened the 5th chest, the one he hadn't examined yet. Inside was a velvet-lined box. He lifted it carefully, opened it. An antique pocket watch lay nestled inside, its gold case catching the lantern light. Amon picked it up, feeling its weight, its quality. He turned it over. An inscription was engraved on the back. For Theodore, carry time wisely, Father, 1920. The watch still ticked. After all these years, it still kept perfect time. Amon opened the case, examined the intricate mechanism visible through the crystal. It was beautiful. tiny gears and springs working in harmony, each piece essential, each movement precise. Beneath the watch lay a folded piece of paper. He opened it carefully. To whoever finds this watch was given to me by my father when I was 10 years old. It taught me that time is precious, that craftsmanship matters, that things built well endure. I've carried it for 74 years. Now I pass it to you, along with everything else in this room. May you carry time wisely, as I tried to do. Amon sat on the attic floor, the watch in one hand, the note in the other, and felt tears sliding down his face. He wasn't sure why he was crying. The weight of responsibility, the magnitude of this gift, the connection to a man he'd never met but was beginning to understand. Theodore Carver had been lonely, perhaps, but he hadn't been bitter. He'd taken his solitude and transformed it into something purposeful. He'd lived with intention, saved with discipline, and planned with generosity. And somehow, impossibly, Amon had been chosen as the recipient of that generosity. But questions still remained. Legal questions, practical questions, and one big question that nagged at him. Why had the house been sold so cheaply to him specifically? The real estate agent had mentioned specific instructions and criteria. What did that mean? Amon closed the watch, tucked it carefully back into its box, and gathered the journals. He needed to know more, needed to understand the full picture before he made any decisions about what to do with this discovery. He descended the attic stairs, locked the door behind him, and glanced at the clock on the wall. 3 a.m. He had to be up in 4 hours to work his shift at the warehouse. But first, he needed to contact the law firm that had handled Theodore's estate. He needed answers from Brennan and Associates. He needed to know if this treasure was truly his, or if claiming it would bring consequences he couldn't afford. Amon made a note on his phone. Call Brennan and Associates. As for whoever handled Carver Estate, get answers. Then he went to his bedroom, lay down fully clothed, and fell into an exhausted sleep filled with dreams of ticking watches and gold coins and a lonely old man who'd spent his life building something beautiful to leave behind. Wednesday. Morning arrived too quickly. Amon called in sick to the warehouse, the first time he'd done so in over a year. Bernard sounded concerned, told him to rest, to take care of himself. The guilt gnawed at Amon, but he needed this day. He needed answers. At 9 o'clock sharp, he called Brennan and Associates. Good morning, Brennan and Associates. How may I direct your call? I need to speak with whoever handled Theodore Carver's estate. I'm the person who bought his house. A pause. 1 moment, please. Classical music played for 2 minutes. Then a woman's voice came on the line, younger than he'd expected, professional but warm. This is Veronica Ashby. I handled Mr. Carver's estate. You must be Amon. Yes, I need to speak with you about... He hesitated. Could he trust her? About the house. And some questions I have regarding the sale. I understand. Can you come to the office this afternoon? Say 2 o'clock? I'll be there. The law firm occupied the 2nd floor of a renovated building downtown. The receptionist directed Amon to a small conference room where Veronica Ashby was waiting. She was in her early 30s, dressed in a grey suit with intelligent eyes that studied him carefully as they shook hands. Thank you for coming in, Amon. Please sit. He sat, suddenly nervous. This woman held answers, but what if those answers meant he'd have to give back what he'd found? I'm going to be direct with you, Veronica began, folding her hands on the table. Mr. Carver left very specific instructions regarding his estate, and I'm bound by attorney-client privilege on many details. However, he also left instructions for me to be transparent with whoever purchased the house, should they have questions. I have questions. I imagine you do. She opened a folder. First, let me confirm. The sale of 847 Maple Street was entirely legal and properly executed. The house and all its contents belong to you. All its contents? Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Understanding, maybe. Yes, everything in the house, including anything you might find in storage areas, the attic, the basement, it's all yours. Amon's heart pounded. The sale price was very low. Why? Mr. Carver's instructions were explicit. He wanted the house sold to someone of modest means, someone with family responsibilities, someone who needed a fresh start. We were directed to price it accordingly and to screen potential buyers based on those criteria. That's unusual. Mr. Carver was an unusual man. He spent 2 years planning this before his death. He interviewed several real estate agents until he found one willing to follow his unconventional instructions. He met with our firm multiple times, ensuring everything was legally sound. Amon leaned forward. Did he tell you what was in the attic? Veronica's lips curved in a slight smile. He told me there were items of value in the house. He did not specify what or where. He simply said that whoever bought the house would discover them and would need to understand they were legitimate property, freely given. How did he choose me? He didn't, not specifically. You met the criteria. Single parent, working class income, demonstrated financial responsibility despite hardship. The real estate agent identified you as a match. Mr. Carver trusted the process he'd created. Amon sat back, processing this. I found journals. He wrote about wanting his wealth to help someone who needed it. That sounds like him. Veronica's professional demeanor softened slightly. Mr. Carver helped me, actually. I didn't know him well, but when I was in law school struggling with tuition, he somehow found out through a mutual acquaintance. He paid for my final year, anonymously initially. I only discovered it was him years later. He gave you money. $50,000. He said talent shouldn't be wasted for lack of resources. She paused. That's why I took this case when he approached the firm. I owed him that much. Amon thought about the loose paper he'd found in the ledger, the list of names and amounts. Veronica's name had been on it. What should I do? The question came out more desperate than he intended. I mean legally, ethically. There's a lot of... He stopped, unsure how much to reveal. Mr. Carver paid all applicable taxes on his estate before his death. Everything was properly documented and cleared. What you found is yours, free and clear. No inheritance tax, no liens, no complications. She met his eyes. However, I should warn you, some treasures come with complications of a different sort. What do you mean? Veronica hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Mr. Carver had no family, but he had a past. And sometimes the past has a way of catching up to the present. If you discover anything that raises questions about origin or legitimacy, you should bring those questions to me immediately. A chill ran through Amon. Are you saying there's something wrong with what I found? I'm saying that valuable items often have histories. Mr. Carver was meticulous about documenting everything, but I can't tell you what I don't know. If you have concerns, come to me. Don't try to handle things alone. They talked for another 20 minutes. Veronica explained the legal protections in place, gave him her direct number, and made it clear she was available if complications arose. But she wouldn't or couldn't tell him more about Theodore's past or the source of his wealth. Amon left the office feeling both reassured and unsettled. The treasure was legally his. That was clear. But Veronica's warning about complications suggested there was more to the story. He drove home, slowly, thinking. When he arrived, Mrs. Abernathy was watering her roses in the front yard. She waved him over. Amon, dear, do you have a moment? Of course. She set down her watering can, wiped her hands on her gardening apron. I wanted to give you something. Wait here. She disappeared into her house, returned a moment later with a cardboard box. Theodore asked me to hold on to these. He said when the new owner seemed ready, I should give them over. I think you're ready. Amon took the box. It was heavier than it looked. What's in it? More of his papers, I believe. Records, documents. He was very organized, Theodore. Kept everything documented, she smiled. He talked about you, you know. Not you specifically, but whoever would come after him. He hoped they'd be good people, kind people. He wanted this house to shelter kindness. I'm trying to be worthy of it. I can see that, dear. Theodore would have liked you. She patted his arm. If you have questions about him, about his life, I knew him for 40 years. I'm happy to share what I know. Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. That means a lot. Inside, Amon opened the box at the kitchen table. It contained file folders, each neatly labeled. Financial records, property documents, receipts dating back decades, and a leather-bound ledger, larger than the journals in the attic. He opened the ledger carefully. Page after page of entries: income, expenses, investments, donations. Theodore had documented every financial transaction of his adult life. The numbers were staggering. His restoration business had been more profitable than Amon realized, but Theodore had lived on a fraction of his income, investing the rest with remarkable discipline. Over 65 years, those investments had grown substantially. There were pages dedicated to charitable giving, anonymous donations to families in need, scholarships for students, medical bills paid for strangers, all meticulously recorded, never publicized. Then Amon found something that made him pause, a section labeled Origins, 1945-1950. The entries were cryptic but revealing. Amounts of gold, documented with weights and purity levels. References to Belgium acquisition and salvage operations. Notes about consulting with military legal advisors and receiving clearance for legitimate salvage. One entry stood out. October 15th, 1948. Final determination from military legal affairs. Items recovered from abandoned enemy bunker in Belgium. February 1945. Classified as legitimate war salvage. No identifiable original owners. No repatriation claims. Personal retention approved per military regulations, Section 7B. Amon sat back, the ledger open before him. So that was it. Theodore had been in the war, had found something, gold probably, in an abandoned Nazi bunker, and had been legally cleared to keep it war salvage. It sounded almost mundane when stated that way. But it meant Theodore's fortune had come from a specific moment in history, a discovery made amid chaos and destruction. And it meant the wealth had been legitimately acquired, properly documented, and legally retained. But if that was true, why had Veronica warned him about complications? The answer came to him slowly. Just because something was legal didn't mean everyone would accept it. If Theodore had companions during that discovery, other soldiers who'd been there, who'd also taken salvage, their families might have different ideas about who owned what. Amon thought about the photograph he'd seen in the attic journals. Theodore with 3 other men, names written on the back. What had happened to them? Had they also kept their salvage? And if so, did their descendants know about it? He returned to the ledger, searching for more information. Near the back, he found a loose page dated just months before Theodore's death. May 3rd, 2023. I am 94 years old. I have weeks, perhaps days remaining. I want to record the truth for whoever comes after me. The gold we found in Belgium was Nazi plunder, with no identifiable victims. We 4 soldiers, myself, Friedrich, Antonio, and Sergei, split it equally. We agreed to use it to build new lives after the horror we'd witnessed. Antonio and Sergei kept their word. They used their portions wisely, helped their families, lived good lives. Friedrich gambled his away and spent 50 years lying to his family, claiming he'd been cheated. His descendants still believe those lies. They've tried for years to claim what was never theirs. I've resisted, but soon I won't be here to resist anymore. Whoever inherits my estate will need to know this history. The gold is legitimate. The inheritance is legal. But the lies persist. Amon closed the ledger, his mind reeling. So there it was, the complication Veronica had warned about. Friedrich's family, still believing their grandfather had been cheated, might come looking for what they thought was rightfully theirs. The question was, would they? The answer came sooner than Amon expected. It started innocently enough. Kira came home from her weekend with Sandra, full of stories about baking cookies and visiting the botanical garden. She seemed happier, lighter, unaware of the weight pressing down on her father's shoulders. Monday morning at school drop-off, another parent, a woman Amon recognized but had never spoken to, approached him in the parking lot. "You're the one who bought the Carver house, right?" "That's right. My kids have been talking about it." "Something about treasure?" She laughed, but there was curiosity in her eyes. Kids and their imaginations. Amon's stomach tightened. Just an old house with some history, but the damage was done. Somehow word had spread. Maybe Mrs. Abernathy had mentioned something to her bridge club about Amon asking questions about Theodore. Maybe someone had seen him visiting the law firm. In small neighborhoods, information traveled faster than wildfire. By Wednesday, 3 different people had mentioned the house to him. A neighbor asking if he'd found anything interesting in that old place. The postal carrier making a joke about hidden treasure maps. Even Bernard at the warehouse had heard something, mentioning that his wife's book club was talking about that mysterious estate sale on Maple Street. Amon tried to dismiss it all, tried to act casual, but paranoia crept in. He'd been so careful not to tell anyone, yet somehow the story was spreading. Distorted, probably. Rumors always were, but spreading nonetheless. Thursday evening, a stranger appeared at his door. The man was tall, well-dressed in a charcoal suit that looked expensive. Late 40s, maybe early 50s, with the kind of confident bearing that came from money and power. He smiled when Amon opened the door, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Good evening." "Are you Amon?" "Who's asking?" "My name is Preston Gale. I'm a private antiques dealer and historical researcher. I heard you recently purchased this property, and I wanted to introduce myself." He extended a business card. "I specialize in items of historical significance, particularly those with connections to World War II. Amon took the card, but didn't invite him in. "I'm not selling anything." Of course. I'm not here to pressure you. I simply wanted to make myself available as a resource. Old houses like this often contain items of value, furniture, documents, personal effects. If you ever need an appraisal or have questions about historical artifacts, I'd be happy to help. Free of charge, naturally. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested." Preston's smile remained fixed. "I understand. New homeowner, lots to deal with, but please keep my card. You never know when you might need expert advice about—" He paused meaningfully. "Unexpected discoveries." The way he said unexpected discoveries sent ice through Amon's veins. This wasn't a casual visit. Preston knew something or suspected something. I'll keep it in mind. "Have a good evening." Amon stepped back, closing the door firmly. Through the window, he watched Preston walk to a black sedan parked across the street. The man didn't leave immediately. He sat in the car for several minutes, looking at the house, before finally driving away. Amon examined the business card. Preston Gale, historical acquisitions and estate appraisals. A phone number, an email address, but no physical business address listed. He pulled out his phone and searched for Preston Gale. The results were sparse and concerning. A minimal website with generic stock photos. A few online reviews, mostly negative, complaining about lowball offers and aggressive tactics. One review mentioned, claimed my grandmother's items were culturally significant and tried to convince me I had to sell to him. Very pushy. This wasn't a legitimate dealer. This was someone fishing for something specific. Amon's next search was more direct. Preston Gale, World War II, Friedrich Weber. Nothing. He tried variations. Preston Weber, Gale Weber family, Friedrich Weber descendants. Still nothing conclusive. But the fact that Preston had showed up at all, asking about historical artifacts and World War II items, couldn't be coincidence. Friday morning, Amon called Veronica Ashby. A man named Preston Gale came to my house. Said he's an antiques dealer interested in World War II items. Have you heard of him? A long pause. What did he look like? Amon described him. That's Preston Weber Gale, Veronica said quietly. Friedrich Weber's great-grandson. He uses his mother's maiden name professionally, probably to avoid raising flags. Mr. Carver warned me about him years ago. What does he want? What he's always wanted. What he believes is his family's stolen inheritance. Friedrich told his children and grandchildren that he'd been cheated out of a fortune by his war buddies. The story's been passed down through 3 generations. Preston has been trying to track down the other families for years. How did he find me? Property records are public. Once the house sold, he would have known. He's probably been watching, waiting to see if you discovered anything. Veronica's voice was tense. Listen to me carefully, Amon. Do not engage with him. Do not confirm or deny anything. And do not, under any circumstances, let him into your house. Is he dangerous?
I don't know.
But he's desperate, and desperate people do unpredictable things. If he approaches you again, Call me immediately." After hanging up, Amon felt the walls closing in. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about family grudges, inherited lies, and the weight of history. He spent the weekend on edge, watching for Preston's black sedan, jumping at every unexpected sound. Kira noticed his tension. "Daddy, are you okay?" "You seem worried." He forced a smile. "Just work stuff, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." But he was worrying enough for both of them. Sunday evening, after Kira was asleep, Amon returned to the attic. He needed to understand more about the photograph he'd seen, the 4 soldiers who'd made their pact in Belgium. He found the image tucked into the second journal. 4 young men in military uniforms standing in front of a damaged building. Theodore was third from left, thinner than in later photos, but with the same careful eyes. The names were written on the back in faded ink. Theodore Carver. Friedrich Weber, Antonio Russo, Sergei Volkov, Belgium, February 1945. Amon photographed the picture with his phone, then searched for information about the other men. Antonio Russo had died in 1998 in New Jersey. Obituary mentioned 3 children and 7 grandchildren. Lived modestly, owned a small restaurant. Sergei Volkov died in 2005 in Oregon. 2 daughters, worked as a carpenter his entire life. Friedrich Weber died in 1987 in Pennsylvania. The obituary was brief, but mentioned financial difficulties and being survived by 1 son. Gerald Weber. Amon searched for Gerald Weber, found an obituary from 2010. Survived by 2 children, including a son named Preston, so that was the connection. Preston was Friedrich's great-grandson, raised on stories of a stolen fortune, believing his family had been wronged. But the journals and ledgers told a different story. Friedrich had received his share of the salvage, properly documented and legally cleared. What he'd done with it afterward, the gambling, the poor decisions, that was on him. Amon returned to the journals, looking for more about the Belgium discovery. He found an entry from March 1945, written shortly after the event. "We found it in the bunker, beneath what used to be an SS officer's estate. The monuments men had already cleared the art and cultural items. We were there doing final sweeps. Friedrich noticed the hidden compartment in the basement wall. Inside were gold bars and coins, undocumented on any manifests. Our commanding officer consulted with legal. The determination, enemy plunder, with no identifiable victims. We were cleared to take it as legitimate salvage, split equally among the 4 of us who made the discovery. We each signed documents acknowledging the distribution. We each swore to use it honorably." Another entry from June 1946. "Friedrich is already spending recklessly. Cards, horses, women. Antonio and Sergei are being careful, saving, building futures. I've invested mine, started apprenticing with a master craftsman. We've gone our separate ways now, but I pray Friedrich finds wisdom before the money runs out. I fear he won't." The story was clear. 4 men had made a legitimate discovery, split it equally, and gone their separate ways. 3 had used their shares wisely, 1 hadn't. And now, 3 generations later, that 1 man's descendant was at Amon's door. A sound outside made Amon freeze. Car engine idling on the street. He moved to the attic window, looked down. Preston's black sedan sat 3 houses away, engine running, lights off. Just sitting there, watching. Amon's hands clenched. This was his house, his property, his legally inherited treasure. He wouldn't be intimidated by a man chasing ghosts of his great-grandfather's poor choices, but even as he thought it, doubt crept in. Legal right was one thing, a determined adversary was another. Preston clearly wasn't going to just go away. The car pulled forward slowly, passed directly in front of Amon's house, then continued down the street and disappeared around the corner. Amon stood in the attic for a long time after, the photograph of the 4 young soldiers in his hand, wondering if Theodore Carver had known this day would come, if he'd anticipated that his final gift would bring not just blessing, but complication. The journals suggested he had. The careful documentation, the legal preparations, the warning to Veronica, all of it pointed to a man who'd understood that the past never fully let go. Amon locked the attic, went downstairs, and checked every door and window in the house. Then he sat at the kitchen table and called Veronica's emergency number. She answered on the second ring. What happened? He's watching the house, driving by slowly. I need to know what I'm dealing with here. What can he actually do? Legally, nothing. The estate is settled, everything is documented. But Preston doesn't always work within legal boundaries. I'll make some calls tomorrow, see if I can get him to back off. In the meantime, do you have security cameras? No, get some. Document everything. If he approaches you again, if he threatens you in any way, we go to the police immediately. After they hung up, Amon sat in the quiet house, listening to the old boards settle, thinking about choices and consequences and the weight of inherited troubles. Tomorrow he'd buy cameras. Tomorrow he'd start building defenses. But tonight he just felt tired of struggling, tired of complications, tired of the universe seemingly determined to make nothing easy. He thought about Theodore, living alone in this house for 65 years, guarding his secrets, preparing for this moment. The old man had tried to protect his final gift, had tried to ensure it reached someone who needed it. Amon just hoped Theodore's protections would be enough. The cameras were installed by Tuesday afternoon, 4 of them covering all approaches to the house. Amon had put them on his credit card, wincing at the added debt but knowing he needed the security. The peace of mind was worth the cost. Wednesday brought a different kind of visitor, Mr. Amon. I'm Professor Stanley Kemp from State University. I understand you're living in Theodore Carver's former residence? The man at the door was in his 60s, wearing a tweed jacket despite the warm weather, with wire-rimmed glasses and the eager expression of someone who lived for research. He looked harmless, but Amon had learned to be cautious. What's this about? I'm a historian specializing in World War II, particularly the Monuments Men program and artifact recovery operations. I'm writing a book about lesser-known salvage operations. Mr. Carver's name came up in some military records I was reviewing, and I was hoping to interview someone who might have access to his papers or journals. Amon studied him carefully. Why now? Mr. Carver died 2 years ago. I only recently obtained declassified documents from the National Archives. They reference a salvage operation in Belgium, February 1945, involving 4 soldiers, including Theodore Carver. I'm trying to piece together what happened. He pulled out a university ID card. I promise I'm legitimate. Just a history professor chasing details for an obscure book probably only 12 people will read. Something about his self-deprecating honesty felt genuine. What do you know about the Belgium operation? Professor Kemp's eyes lit up. May I come in? This might take a few minutes. Amon hesitated, then stepped aside. They sat in the living room, and the professor pulled out a leather notebook filled with handwritten notes. In February 1945, Allied forces were pushing through Belgium. The Monuments Men, you've heard of them? Protecting cultural artifacts, exactly. They were assigned to protect and recover artwork and valuables the Nazis had looted. One team was working in a region where an SS officer named Klaus Hoffmann had maintained a private estate. After Hoffmann fled, the Monuments Men recovered paintings, sculptures, documents, all properly catalogued and repatriated. But according to these recently declassified records, he pulled out photocopied documents. 4 enlisted men doing final sweeps of the property discovered an undocumented cache. Amon leaned forward. What kind of cache? Gold bars and coins hidden in a false wall in the basement. The interesting part is what happened next. The soldiers reported the find to their commanding officer, who consulted with military legal affairs. The determination was made that this was enemy, war plunder with no identifiable victims, likely gold Hoffmann had acquired through black market dealings or theft from other Nazis, since it couldn't be attributed to any specific victims and represented enemy assets. It was classified as legitimate salvage under military regulations of the time, so the soldiers were allowed to keep it. Each received an equal share, properly documented and cleared through military legal channels. It was unusual but not unprecedented. The regulations allowed for personal retention of enemy salvage under specific circumstances. Professor Kemp tapped his notes. What fascinates me is what happened afterward. I've tracked down information about 3 of the 4 soldiers. Theodore Carver used his share to build a successful restoration business. Antonio Russo opened a restaurant. Sergei Volkov became a carpenter. All 3 lived modestly and apparently used their windfall wisely. And the 4th, the professor's expression grew somber. Friedrich Weber, that's where the story gets complicated. I found very little documentation about his later life, but what I did find suggests financial troubles. And here's the interesting part. He pulled out another document. I was contacted several years ago by a man claiming to be Weber's great-grandson, Preston Weber Gale. He insisted his great-grandfather had been cheated, that the gold had been stolen from him by the other soldiers. Amon's pulse quickened. What did you tell him? The truth. That according to every document I could find, the gold was split equally, and each soldier signed acknowledgements of receipt. But he didn't want to hear it. He became quite aggressive, actually, demanding I give him information about the other soldiers' families. I refused, of course. Academic ethics aside, something about him made me uncomfortable. Has he contacted you recently? No, why do you ask? Amon made a decision. Because he showed up at my door last week. Claims to be an antiques dealer, but I looked into him. He's not legitimate. Professor Kemp's face grew concerned. Has he threatened you? Not directly, but he's been watching the house. You should be careful. I did some digging after our encounter years ago. Preston Weber Gale has a history of harassment. Several restraining orders filed against him by other families he believed possessed what he calls his inheritance. The man is obsessed with recovering what he thinks his great-grandfather lost. They talked for another hour. Professor Kemp shared copies of the military documents, the official salvage reports, the legal clearances. Everything confirmed what Amon had learned from Theodore's journals. The gold had been legitimately acquired and properly distributed. Would you be willing to testify to this if necessary? Amon asked. If Preston tries to make legal claims? Absolutely. The historical record is clear, and honestly, I'd be interested to see any documents or journals Mr. Carver might have left. For research purposes, of course. I'd respect your privacy, but if there are details about that operation, let me think about it, Amon said. But thank you. This information helps. After the professor left, Amon felt simultaneously relieved and more anxious. He had an expert witness if needed, someone who could testify to the legitimacy of Theodore's acquisition. But Preston's history of harassment was troubling. The man wasn't going to give up easily. That evening, Kira had homework about family trees. She sat at the kitchen table with markers and construction paper, drawing branches and adding names. Daddy, I need more names. Can we call Grandma Sandra and ask about Mommy's family? Amon helped her make the call, listening to his daughter chat happily with her grandmother about great-grandparents and cousins and family stories. The normalcy of it, this simple homework assignment, this connection to heritage, struck him powerfully. This was what mattered. Not gold in an attic or old war salvage or inherited grudges. This, his daughter, learning about where she came from, building her understanding of family and connection. After Kira went to bed, Amon returned to the attic one more time. He'd been avoiding it, afraid of what it represented, afraid of the complications it brought. But tonight he needed to see it differently. He opened the chests again, really looked at them. The gold coins weren't just money, they were history, frozen in metal. Each one had traveled its own path to end up here. The jewelry pieces were craftsmanship, artistry, someone's careful work. And the journals, these were Theodore's life, his thoughts, his careful documentation of how he'd tried to live honorably with an unexpected windfall. In the third journal, Amon found entries he'd missed before. A section dated 1970-1985, documenting Theodore's anonymous charitable giving. Pages and pages of it. A young veteran's medical bills paid. A widow's mortgage covered. A child's surgery funded. Scholarships, groceries, rent payments, a steady stream of quiet generosity spanning decades. One entry stopped him. December 19th, 1982. Met a single mother today at the grocery store. Her card was declined. She had 2 children with her, trying to be brave while their mother counted change that wasn't enough. I paid for her groceries. She cried. I told her someone helped me once and I was passing it forward. That's the truth in a way. The war gave me this chance. The least I can do is give others chances too. Amon thought about his own declined card, the shame of counting pennies while Kira watched. He thought about Theodore's philosophy. Wealth should flow like water, nourishing and giving life. The old man had understood something fundamental. Money was a tool, not a treasure. The real treasure was what you did with it, how you used it to help others, to ease suffering, to create opportunity. A sound from outside pulled him from his thoughts. Through the attic window, he saw a car slowing in front of the house. Preston's black sedan, making another pass. Amon pulled out his phone, checked the security camera feed. The car stopped, idled for 30 seconds, then moved on. But this time Amon had it recorded. Time-stamped, documented evidence of surveillance. He downloaded the footage, backed it up, and sent a copy to Veronica Ashby with a simple message. 3rd drive-by this week. Building documentation. Her response came within minutes. Good, keep recording. I'm working on something that might resolve this. Amon closed the attic, locked the door, and stood in the hallway looking at the yellowed note still taped to the frame. Don't open the attic, he'd opened it. And yes, complications had followed, exactly as Theodore must have known they would. But Amon was beginning to understand that the complications weren't punishment. They were tests. Tests of character, of integrity, of what you did, when suddenly given more than you'd ever expected. Theodore had faced those tests and passed them, using his unexpected wealth to live simply and give generously for 65 years. Now those tests had been passed to Amon. The question was, how would he measure up? He thought about Kira's family tree assignment, about building a legacy worth leaving behind, about being the kind of father who taught not just by words, but by example, about showing his daughter that doing the right thing mattered more than taking the easy path. Preston Weber Gale could watch the house all he wanted, could drive by, could make vague threats, could chase his great-grandfather's lies until the end of his days. Amon wasn't going to be intimidated into giving up what was rightfully his, not for himself, but for what it represented. Theodore had chosen him for a reason, had structured his entire estate around finding someone who would understand and appreciate this gift, someone who would carry the legacy forward. Amon intended to be worthy of that choice, whatever it took. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who asked Amon to sign for it. The envelope was thick, official, intimidating. Amon waited until Kira left for school before opening. It Weber Gale v. Amon, petition for recovery of misappropriated family assets and challenge to estate. Distribution. His hands trembled as he read through the legal language. Preston was suing him, claiming that Theodore Carver's will was fraudulent, that the gold and valuables in the attic rightfully belonged to the Weber family as Friedrich's legitimate inheritance, and that Amon had knowingly purchased stolen property. The claims were absurd, but they were also terrifying. Legal battles cost money Amon didn't have. Even if he won, the process could drag on for months, maybe years, and the publicity would destroy any semblance of privacy he had left. He called Veronica immediately. I was afraid of this, she said after he read her sections of the complaint. Preston's been building toward it for weeks. Come to the office this afternoon. We need to prepare a response. At 2 o'clock, Amon sat across from Veronica in the conference room. She'd brought in a senior partner, an older attorney named Gerald Frost, who specialized in estate disputes. This lawsuit is baseless, Frost said, reviewing the complaint with a critical eye. But that doesn't mean it won't cause you headaches. Preston is hoping to exhaust you financially and emotionally until you agree to a settlement. I don't have money for a settlement. I don't have money for legal fees either. Veronica and Frost exchanged glances. Mr. Carver anticipated this possibility, Veronica said carefully. He established a legal defense fund specifically for situations like this. If his estate was challenged by the Weber family, the fund would cover all legal costs for the rightful heir. Amon stared at her. He thought of everything. Not everything, Frost said. But he was thorough. Now let's talk about what we're dealing with. Preston's case rests on 3 claims: that Theodore's will was fraudulent, that the gold was stolen from Friedrich, and that you knowingly participated in the fraud. We can demolish all 3. Over the next hour, they built their defense strategy. The video testimony Theodore had recorded, the military salvage documents Professor Kemp had provided, the signed acknowledgements from all 4 soldiers, Friedrich's documented gambling problems and bankruptcy, the meticulous records Theodore had kept for 65 years. We have everything we need, Veronica assured him. But you need to understand, this will get public. Court proceedings are matters of record. The media will likely pick up on it. Local man finds WQT treasure, makes for compelling headlines. What about Kira? What about keeping her safe from all this? We'll do everything we can to minimize exposure. But you need to prepare her, and yourself. The next few weeks are going to be difficult. The first news article appeared online that evening. Legal battle erupts over Wu treasure found in local attic. It was brief, mostly speculation, but it named Amon and included a photo of his house. By Wednesday morning, 3 reporters had called. 2 more showed up at his door. Amon didn't answer any of them, but their presence was unnerving. Neighbors stared. At Kira's school, other parents whispered. Mrs. Chen pulled him aside during pickup. Kira asked me today if you found pirate treasure. Some of the other children have been talking. It's complicated, Amon said. But I promise everything is legal and above board. I just need to prove it in court. I believe you, Mrs. Chen said kindly. But children can be cruel. She might face questions. That night, Amon sat down with Kira and tried to explain in 8-year-old terms what was happening. Remember how I told you Mr. Carver, who used to live here, left some things in the attic? The treasure? Kira's eyes were wide. Not treasure exactly. Old things with value. Mr. Carver wanted whoever bought the house to have them. But someone else, a man whose great-grandfather knew Mr. Carver a long time ago, thinks those things should belong to his family instead. That's not fair. Mr. Carver left them for us. I know, sweetheart. That's why we have to go to court and prove it. But it might be in the news and people might ask you questions. I need you to know that everything is going to be okay. We're not doing anything wrong. Kira thought about this seriously. Is that why those people with cameras were outside? His heart sank. You saw them. Mrs. Abernathy told them to leave. She said this was a respectable neighborhood and they were being pests. Despite everything, Amon smiled. Mrs. Abernathy, fierce protector of Maple Street, the following week brought unexpected support. Mrs. Abernathy organized what she called a neighborhood solidarity gathering. Essentially, all the long-time residents came to Amon's house with casseroles and kind words. Theodore would be proud of you, Mrs. Abernathy said, squeezing his hand. Standing up to that Weber boy and his nonsense. Friedrich was a troubled man, God rest him, but that's no excuse for his family harassing innocent people 3 generations later. You knew Friedrich? They met him once years ago. He came looking for Theodore, demanding money. Said Theodore had stolen from him. Theodore very calmly showed him documents, signatures, receipts, legal papers, proving everything had been split fairly. Friedrich left angry, but he had no leg to stand on. That was 1985, maybe 86. Theodore said Friedrich had been coming around every few years since the war ended, always with the same story. 30 years of harassment? More, and now his great-grandson has taken up the cause. But you have what Friedrich never had, the truth and the documentation to prove it. On Friday, Veronica called with news. We have a preliminary hearing scheduled for next week. It's just procedural, but Preston will be there. His lawyers will make their case for why the lawsuit should proceed. What do I need to do? Show up, look respectable, let me do the talking. And Amon, I need you to bring something. The video testimony Theodore recorded. I want it entered into evidence immediately. The weekend passed in a blur of anxiety. Amon barely slept. He went through the motions, making meals, helping with homework. keeping things normal for Kira, but his mind was elsewhere, running through scenarios, imagining outcomes. Sunday evening he returned to the attic, not to look at the treasure, but to read more of Theodore's journals. He needed to understand the man who'd given him this gift, who'd anticipated this battle and prepared for it. In the fifth journal, dated 1995-2010, Amon found a section that spoke directly to his situation. June 12, 2005. I'm 76 years old today. Friedrich died in 1987, bitter to the end, but his family carries on his grudge. They've written to me several times, threatening legal action, demanding what they call their rightful inheritance. I've sent them copies of the original documents each time. They never respond to the evidence, only to their belief in Friedrich's lies. I've learned something about human nature through this. Some people would rather believe a comforting lie than face an uncomfortable truth. Friedrich's family needs to believe he was wronged, because accepting that he squandered his own fortune through poor choices would mean their poverty was his fault, not mine. It's easier to have an external villain than to face internal failure. Another entry from 2018. I'm preparing my final affairs. The lawyers tell me I should expect challenges to my estate from the Weber family. I've done everything I can to protect whoever inherits from me. But I also know that some battles must be fought by the inheritor themselves. This is part of the test, part of proving they're worthy of the gift. Anyone can accept wealth. Not everyone can defend it with integrity. Amon closed the journal, understanding settling over him like a weight. This wasn't just about keeping the treasure. It was about proving he deserved it, proving he had the strength and character to honor Theodore's legacy. In the bottom of the fifth chest, beneath where the journals had been stored, Amon found a sealed envelope he'd somehow missed before. His name was written on it in Theodore's shaky handwriting, for Amon to be opened when challenged. His hands trembled as he broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a smaller, sealed envelope. The letter read, "Dear Amon, if you're reading this, the Weber family has come for what they believe is theirs. I'm sorry for the burden this places on you. They could have given away this wealth before my death and spared you this trouble. But I needed someone to carry forward not just the money, but the principle behind it. Friedrich made his choices. So did I, so did Antonio and Sergei. We each received equal shares of something we found in a terrible place during a terrible time. We chose to use it to build new lives. Friedrich chose poorly. That's not my fault, and it's not yours. Inside the second envelope, you'll find a document I've never shown anyone, not even my lawyers. It's the original division agreement, signed by all four of us in 1945. With a clause specifically stating that no soldier or his heirs could claim any other soldier's share under any circumstances. Friedrich signed it. His signature is witnessed by our commanding officer. Use this document when you need it most. It's your shield against lies and greed. I chose you because you needed help, yes, but also because I believed you would understand what this gift really means. It's not just money, it's responsibility. It's a legacy. It's the choice to use what you've been given to make the world a little better. Don't let them take it from you. Not because you need the money, though you do, but because giving in to lies and intimidation dishonors everyone who tried to do the right thing. Stand firm. The truth is your foundation, and it's unshakable. Theodore Carver. Amon's vision blurred with tears. This stranger, this man he'd never met, had believed in him, had structured everything to protect him, had left him not just wealth, but wisdom and weapons to defend it. He opened the second envelope carefully. Inside was a yellowed document, signed by 4 young soldiers in 1945, laying out the terms of their agreement. The final clause was clear. Each signatory relinquishes any claim to the other signatory's portions, in perpetuity, binding to all heirs and descendants. Friedrich Weber's signature sat at the bottom. Bold and clear, witnessed and dated, this was it. The final piece of evidence. The irrefutable proof that would end Preston's claims forever. Amon carefully photographed the document, backed up the images to 3 separate cloud services, then returned the original to its envelope. He would give it to Veronica tomorrow. And then finally, this battle would be over. He descended from the attic, locked the door, and paused at the note still taped to the frame. Don't open the attic. Theodore had known that opening it would bring challenges, but he'd also known that those challenges would prove whether the inheritor was worthy of the gift. Amon intended to prove he was. Monday morning, Amon arrived at Brennan and Associates with the sealed envelope containing Theodore's final document. Veronica's face lit up when she saw it. "This is exactly what we need," she said, carefully examining the 1945 agreement. "With this, Preston's entire case collapses. But we need to be strategic about when we present it." Gerald Frost joined them, studying the document with the careful attention of someone who understood its significance. "This is pristine. Original signatures, proper witnessing, legally binding language. We'll have it authenticated by a document examiner, but even without that, this ends the dispute. So why not present it immediately?" Amon asked. "Because," Frost said with a slight smile, "we want Preston and his lawyers to fully commit to their narrative first. Let them present their case, make their claims, build their argument on the foundation that no such agreement existed. Then we produce this document and watch their entire case crumble. It feels like a game." "It is a game," Veronica said gently. "A legal one. And we're playing to win. Not just this case, but ensuring Preston can never bring another frivolous lawsuit. When we're done, there will be court precedent protecting you and Theodore's legacy permanently." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for Thursday. Veronica spent the week preparing, conducting practice sessions with Amon, making sure he understood what to expect. "Preston will be there with his lawyers," she explained. "They'll argue that there's sufficient grounds for the lawsuit to proceed. We'll counter with some of our evidence, the video testimony, the military salvage documents, but we'll hold back the agreement. That's our ace. What if the judge rules against us anyway? He won't. The preliminary evidence alone is overwhelming. But even if he did, we'd appeal and eventually win." Theodore covered every angle. Wednesday evening, Amon sat with Kira in the living room, helping her practice spelling words. The normalcy of it, the simple ritual of parent and child, grounded him. This was what mattered. Not courtrooms or lawyers or inherited grudges. This, "Daddy, will you have to go away?" Kira asked suddenly. "What?" "No, sweetheart. Why would you think that?" Ashley at school said her parents had to go to court once, and then her daddy moved out. Amon set down the spelling list, pulled Kira close. "That's different. Ashley's parents were having grown-up problems with each other. I'm going to court to prove that something belongs to us. I'm not going anywhere. I promise. And we get to keep the house?" "We get to keep the house." She relaxed against him. "Good, I like my room. And I like Mrs. Abernathy, and the tree in the backyard. Me too, kiddo." "Me too." Thursday morning arrived grey and drizzling. Amon wore the only suit he owned, bought for Sarah's funeral, worn only once since. Veronica met him at the courthouse entrance, ready? "As I'll ever be." The courtroom was smaller than he'd expected, wood-paneled and formal. Preston sat at the plaintiff's table with two lawyers in expensive suits. When Amon entered, Preston's eyes tracked him with cold calculation. The judge, a woman in her 50s named Barbara Hartley, took the bench promptly at 9. She reviewed the case file briefly, then looked up. "This is a preliminary hearing to determine whether sufficient grounds exist for this case to proceed. Mr. Preston, your attorneys may present." Preston's lead attorney, a sharp-featured man named Richard Delacroix, stood and launched into his argument. He painted a picture of Friedrich Weber as a war hero cheated by his fellow soldiers, of a family robbed of their rightful inheritance for 3 generations, of Theodore Carver as a manipulator who'd hidden the truth. "The defendant," Delacroix said, gesturing toward Amon, "purchased this property knowing or having reason to know it contained assets stolen from the Weber family. We ask this court to freeze those assets pending full litigation and to grant discovery rights to examine all contents of the property." Amon's jaw clenched. The accusation that he'd known about the treasure before buying the house was a lie, but Delacroix presented it as established fact. Judge Hartley turned to Veronica. Ms. Ashby, your response. Veronica stood calm and composed. Your Honor, the plaintiff's claims are built on a foundation of family mythology, not fact. With the court's permission, I'd like to present evidence that definitively establishes the legitimate provenance of the disputed assets and the legal validity of Mr. Carver's estate distribution. Proceed. Veronica played Theodore's video testimony on a screen positioned where the judge could see it clearly. The courtroom fell silent as Theodore's voice filled the space, telling his story in his own words. He explained the Belgium discovery, the military legal clearance, the equal division among 4 soldiers, Friedrich's subsequent choices. Friedrich Weber received his full share, Theodore said on the recording. What he did with it afterward was his responsibility, not mine. I've kept detailed records of everything. The truth is documented. The lies persist only because some people prefer them to reality. When the video ended, Judge Hartley's expression had shifted. Veronica then presented the military salvage documents, the signed receipts showing Friedrich had acknowledged receiving his share. Friedrich's later bankruptcy records Delacroix objected repeatedly, but each objection was overruled. The evidence was properly authenticated, properly submitted, and devastatingly clear. Furthermore, Your Honor, Veronica continued, we have expert testimony from Professor Stanley Kemp, a World War II historian who has independently verified every aspect of this account through military archives. The plaintiff's narrative is contradicted by every contemporaneous document. The plaintiff's family has a right to their belief. Delacroix began. Belief is not evidence, Judge Hartley interrupted. And this court deals in evidence, not family stories. Continue, Ms. Ashby. Veronica presented the timeline of Friedrich's harassment of Theodore over decades, the documented instances of Preston harassing other descendants, the pattern of baseless claims. This lawsuit is not an attempt to recover stolen property, Veronica said. It's the latest chapter in an 80-year-old story of one family's refusal to accept responsibility for their own ancestors' choices. They've found a new target in my client, a single father who bought a house legally and discovered assets legally bequeathed to him. The plaintiff seeks to punish him for Theodore Carver's generosity. Preston leaned forward, whispering urgently to Delacroix. The lawyer stood. Your Honor, we request a recess to review some of the evidence presented. Denied. You've had ample time to prepare. This is a preliminary hearing, not a full trial. Do you have additional arguments? Delacroix fumbled through his notes, clearly thrown by the strength of the evidence. He made a few weak attempts to cast doubt on the document's authenticity, suggested that the military clearance might have been obtained through fraud, implied that Theodore could have forged the receipts. Each suggestion sounded more desperate than the last. Judge Hartley let him finish, then sat back in her chair. I've heard enough. Ms. Ashby, do you have closing remarks? Only that every document we've presented is authenticated and verifiable. The plaintiff has presented no evidence, only allegations based on family stories contradicted by historical record. We respectfully request this case be dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Delacroix. The lawyer stood again, but his arguments had lost their conviction. He knew they were losing. Judge Hartley reviewed her notes for several minutes. The courtroom was silent, except for the soft sound of rain against the windows. Finally, she looked up. This case presents an interesting example of how family narratives can diverge from historical fact. The plaintiff's family has apparently believed for 3 generations that Friedrich Weber was cheated. That belief may be sincere, but sincerity doesn't make it true. She glanced at Preston, whose face had gone rigid. The evidence presented today overwhelmingly demonstrates that Friedrich Weber received his full share of legitimately salvaged war assets. What he did with that share was his own affair. The subsequent poverty of his family, while unfortunate, is not the responsibility of Theodore Carver's heir. Amon's heart began to race. Was this it? Furthermore, Judge Hartley continued, Theodore Carver's estate was properly executed, his will valid, and his distribution of assets entirely within his legal rights. The defendant purchased the property legally and owns all its contents, whatever they may be. She looked directly at Preston. Mr. Weber Gale, I understand the family stories are powerful, but you cannot use the court system to rewrite history or to extract settlements from people who've done nothing wrong. This lawsuit lacks merit, and frankly, it borders on harassment. She turned to Veronica. I'm granting your motion to dismiss with prejudice. This means Mr. Weber Gale cannot bring another lawsuit making these same claims. The matter is settled. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Amon sat frozen, barely processing what had just happened. They'd won. It was over. Preston stood abruptly, his face contorted with anger. This is a travesty. That gold belonged to my great-grandfather. You're letting this nobody steal from my family. Mr. Weber Gale, Judge Hartley said sharply, you will control yourself in my courtroom. Another outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt. Delacroix grabbed Preston's arm, pulling him back. They gathered their papers and left quickly, Preston shooting one last venomous look at Amon. Veronica touched Amon's shoulder. It's over. You're clear. Just like that? Just like that. With prejudice means he can't try again. Theodore's legacy is protected, and so are you. Outside the courthouse, rain still falling, Amon stood on the steps and let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for weeks. Reporters called questions from under umbrellas, but Veronica handled them with a brief statement about justice prevailing and historical record being respected. In his car, alone, finally, Amon called Mrs. Abernathy. We won. Of course you did, dear. Theodore knew you would. He drove to Kira's school, arrived early for pickup, and waited in the parking lot watching rain streak the windshield. His phone buzzed with messages. Mrs. Chen congratulating him. Bernard from the warehouse saying he'd seen the news. Even Professor Kemp asking if he might still be interested in discussing the journals for research purposes. When Kira emerged from school, Amon hugged her tightly. Everything's okay now, he said. It's all settled, so we get to keep everything. We get to keep everything. She smiled, and in that moment Amon understood what Theodore had really given him. Not just financial security, but the chance to show his daughter that standing up for what's right mattered. That truth could win over lies. That integrity had value beyond money. The real treasure had never been in the attic. It had been in the lesson, the legacy, the example of living well. The weeks following the court victory brought a strange kind of peace. The reporters moved on to other stories. Preston's car stopped appearing on Maple Street. The neighborhood gossip faded into background noise, replaced by the ordinary rhythms of life. But Amon still hadn't touched the treasure. It sat in the attic, waiting, while he struggled with a question that kept him awake at night. What now? He could sell everything, deposit the money, live comfortably, pay off debts, quit the warehouse, give Kira everything she deserved. The practical part of his brain insisted this was the obvious choice, but Theodore's journals haunted him. The meticulous documentation of how the old man had lived simply, given generously, used wealth as a tool rather than an end. Every time Amon considered selling the gold, he heard Theodore's words, "Money should flow like water. It should nourish and give life." One evening, Veronica called. "I have something for you. Can you come by the office tomorrow?" The next afternoon, she handed him a thin folder. "Theodore left one more thing. Instructions for you specifically. I was directed to give this to you only after any legal challenges were resolved." Inside was a handwritten letter dated 2 weeks before Theodore's death, and a smaller sealed envelope. "Dear Amon, you've proven yourself by now. You defended the gift with integrity, as I knew you would. Now comes the harder part, deciding what to do with it. I could tell you exactly how to use this wealth, but that would defeat the purpose. You must make your own choices, follow your own conscience. But I'll offer you what I learned over 65 years. First, don't hoard it. Wealth stagnates when stored and blooms when used. Keep enough to give yourself breathing room. Security is different from luxury, but let the rest flow outward. Second, help quietly. The best giving happens in private, without recognition or praise. Anonymous help changes lives without creating obligation or embarrassment. Third, invest in people, not things. The most valuable use of money is giving someone else a chance at education, at healing, at starting over. Things depreciate. Human potential appreciates. Fourth, remember where it came from. This wealth began in darkness, a war, a bunker, stolen Nazi gold. I tried to redeem that darkness by using it for light. You can continue that redemption. The small envelope contains account information for what I call the legacy fund. It's invested conservatively, generates modest returns, and holds enough to support careful giving for decades. The principal is yours to use or preserve as you see fit. The returns should be given away annually to people who need help. You'll know them when you see them. They'll be where you were when you bought this house. You were chosen not just because you needed help, but because I believed you would understand that receiving this gift comes with responsibility. Not legal responsibility, that's yours free and clear. Moral responsibility, the responsibility to carry forward the good that can come from unexpected fortune. Whatever you decide, know that I trusted you, not just with gold and journals, but with a legacy of trying to do right, even when no one's watching. Theodore. Amon opened the smaller envelope. Inside were account numbers, passwords, legal documents, establishing him as the sole trustee of the legacy fund. The balance listed made him dizzy, enough to generate significant annual returns while preserving the principal. Indefinitely, Theodore had thought of everything, had structured it so Amon could keep the attic treasure, security for himself and Kira, while having a separate fund specifically for helping others. The practical and the principled balanced perfectly. That evening, Amon returned to the attic one final time with the first journal. He sat on the floor, the skylight above showing stars through the darkness, and read Theodore's earliest entries again. The young immigrant arriving with nothing, building something through careful work and careful choices. June 3rd, 1952, purchased the house today. It needs work, but it's mine. Amon thought about his own first days in this house. The mix of hope and fear, the weight of responsibility, the desperate wish for things to finally work out. December 20th, 1952. I live on very little. What I need is time to work, space to think, and the satisfaction of doing something well. That satisfaction, that was what had been missing from Amon's life. Working just to survive left no room for the satisfaction of doing something meaningful. Theodore was offering him that room. He closed the journal, stood, and looked around the attic. The 5 chests, the journals, Theodore's pocket watch resting in its velvet box. This strange inheritance from a man he'd never met, who'd somehow known exactly what kind of person Amon would be. A sound from downstairs, Kira calling for him. He descended the attic stairs, locked the door behind him and paused at the yellowed note. Don't open the attic. He finally understood. The note wasn't a warning against opening the door. It was a warning against opening it lightly, without thought, without being prepared for what it meant. Theodore had wanted whoever inherited this house to make a conscious choice, to decide deliberately to accept both the gift and the responsibility it carried. Amon had opened it, had faced the consequences, had proven to Theodore's ghost, to himself, to his daughter, that he could handle what came with unexpected fortune. Now he had to decide who he would become with it. Not just a man who'd gotten lucky, not just someone who'd inherited wealth, but someone who carried forward a legacy of using what you have to help others who need it. In the kitchen, Kira sat at the table with her homework. Math problems, fractions and decimals. She looked up when he entered. "Daddy, can you help with number 7? I don't understand how to reduce fractions." Amon sat beside her, guided her through the problem, showed her how complex things could be simplified, broken down into manageable pieces, solved step by step. When she finished her homework, she asked, "Are we going to be okay now?" "Like really okay?" He pulled her close. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be really okay. And we're going to help other people be okay too, like Mr. Carver did. Exactly like Mr. Carver did. She smiled, satisfied, and went to get ready for bed. Amon sat alone in the kitchen thinking about tomorrow, about calling the community center and asking about families who needed help, about researching scholarships for single parents trying to go back to school, about finding the modern equivalence of Theodore's quiet generosity. The gold would stay in the attic for now, secure and documented. But the legacy fund would flow like water, nourishing and giving life, just as Theodore had intended. Amon finally knew what to do. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt not just hope, but purpose. 3 months after the court victory, Amon stood in what used to be Theodore's basement workshop, now transformed into his own space. The old workbenches remained, solid and well-crafted, but Amon had added new tools, better lighting, and a sense of possibility that hadn't existed before. He'd quit the night shift at the warehouse. Bernard had been genuinely happy for him, clasping his hand firmly and saying, "Sometimes life surprises you. Make the most of it." Amon was making the most of it. He'd enrolled in community college, studying business management and accounting. Not because he needed the degree for career advancement, but because he wanted to understand how to manage Theodore's legacy properly, how to make the money work for others the way Theodore had intended. The first recipient of the legacy fund had been a single mother named Patricia, whose car had broken down. She worked 2 jobs, had 3 kids, and couldn't afford the repairs. Amon had the mechanic call him with the estimate, then paid it anonymously. The mechanic told her only that someone in the community wanted to help. Veronica had smiled when he told her. "That's very Theodore of you." "I'm learning," he'd said. The second recipient was a veteran struggling with medical bills. The third was a family facing eviction. Each time, Amon researched carefully, verified the need, and helped quietly. No recognition, no thanks expected. Just money flowing where it was needed, like water nourishing dry ground. The transformation wasn't just financial. Amon felt different, lighter somehow, despite carrying more responsibility than ever. Purpose did that, he realized. It gave weight to your days without making them heavy. Kira noticed the change too. "You smile more now, Daddy?" "Do I?" "Yeah, and you're home when I get back from school." "I like that. Me too, kiddo." The house itself had been renovated carefully. New roof, updated plumbing, fresh paint throughout. But Amon had kept Theodore's craftsmanship visible. The original oak banister, the handmade cabinet doors, the careful details that showed a man who valued quality over speed. The attic remained mostly unchanged. The chests sat where Theodore had placed them. The journals rested in their original spots. Amon went up there sometimes, usually in the evening after Kira was asleep, to read more of Theodore's thoughts, or simply to sit in the quiet space and think. He'd found something in the final journal that he returned to often. An entry from Theodore's last month, March 15th, 2023. "I'm dying. The doctors say weeks, maybe a month. I'm not afraid. I've lived a full life, done what I could with what I had. But I find myself thinking about the moment I found that gold in Belgium. 4 young soldiers, traumatized by war, stumbling on something valuable in all that destruction. We could have kept it secret, divided it quietly, told no one. But we did it right. We reported it, got proper clearance, documented everything. Even Friedrich, for all his later failures, agreed to do it honestly. That choice, to handle unexpected fortune with integrity, defined the rest of my life. I hope whoever inherits my estate makes the same choice. Not because they have to, but because they understand that how you gain something matters as much as having it. Amon understood that now. The treasure's value wasn't just in the gold, but in the story of how it was acquired, how it was kept, how it was passed on. Integrity at every step, spanning 80 years, from a Belgian bunker to a Pennsylvania attic. One afternoon, Professor Kemp visited. Amon had finally agreed to let him examine some of the journals, the early ones, detailing the Belgium discovery and its aftermath. The professor handled the documents with reverent care. "This is remarkable. Primary source material about salvage operations during the war. Would you consider allowing me to include excerpts in my book? I'd keep your name anonymous, of course. What's the book about? How ordinary soldiers navigated extraordinary circumstances. The moral choices they faced when rules weren't clear and survival wasn't guaranteed. Your Mr. Carver exemplifies the best of that. Men who tried to do right, even when they could have taken easier, darker paths. Amon thought about it. Theodore wanted to be forgotten, lived quietly, gave anonymously. But maybe his story deserves to be told. As an example. As a lesson, Professor Kemp agreed. That finding treasure is easy. Keeping your soul while you keep it, that's the real challenge. They worked together that afternoon, the professor taking careful notes, Amon reading passages aloud. The story of 4 soldiers and their different fates. Antonio, who'd used his share to build a restaurant that fed his community for 40 years. Sergei, who'd become a carpenter and built homes for working families. Theodore, who'd lived simply and given generously until his final day. And Friedrich, whose poor choices had echoed down through generations. Do you ever wonder, Professor Kemp asked, what you would have done in their position? Young, scared, finding gold in the midst of horror? I hope I would have done what Theodore did. Reported it, done it honestly, used it well. But I don't know. It's easy to say what you do when you're not in the moment. That's wise. Hindsight is cheap. But you are in a moment now, inheriting that same fortune, facing your own choices about how to use it. So far, you're following Theodore's path. I'm trying. When the professor left, Amon returned to the basement workshop. He'd been restoring an old chair he'd found at an estate sale, practicing Theodore's craft, learning the patience and precision it required. There was satisfaction in taking something broken and making it whole again, in seeing potential where others saw only damage. Maybe that's what Theodore had seen in him. Not a wealthy man or a successful one, but someone broken who could be made whole again. Someone who would understand that being given a second chance came with the responsibility to offer others the same gift. The chair's joint finally aligned perfectly. Amon applied glue carefully, clamped it secure, and stepped back to admire the work. Small progress, but real. Like everything else in his new life, built slowly, carefully, with attention to doing it right. Upstairs, Kira was practicing piano on the used upright Amon had bought last month. The notes were hesitant, but growing more confident. Another investment in potential, in possibility, in the future. Amon cleaned his tools, put everything in its place, and climbed the stairs to where his daughter was playing. He stood in the doorway listening, grateful beyond measure for this moment, this house, this unexpected life. Tomorrow, he'd help another family. Next week, he'd attend another class. Next month, who knew? But today, right now, he was exactly where Theodore had hoped someone would be, home, happy, and ready to carry forward a legacy of quiet goodness. That was enough. That was everything. 6 months had passed since Amon opened the attic door. Spring had arrived on Maple Street, bringing dogwood blossoms and the gentle warmth of renewal. The house looked different now, not just maintained, but loved. Window boxes held flowers Kira had helped plant. The front porch had been repaired and painted. The oak tree in the backyard wore a rope swing that swayed in the breeze. Inside, the changes ran deeper. Amon stood in the kitchen on a Saturday morning, making pancakes while Kira set the table. This simple ritual, weekend breakfast together, no rush, no stress, still felt miraculous. 6 months ago, he'd been working night shifts, grabbing sleep in stolen hours, always exhausted, always behind. Now he had time. Time to be present, time to be a father, time to think about something beyond mere survival. Mrs. Abernathy's coming for breakfast, Kira announced, carefully placing forks beside each plate. I invited her yesterday. Is that okay? That's perfect, sweetheart. The doorbell rang, and Kira ran to answer it. Mrs. Abernathy entered with a container of fresh strawberries from her garden and a smile that hadn't dimmed in 43 years on this street. Good morning, dear ones. Something smells wonderful. They ate together, the 3 of them, talking about Kira's upcoming school recital, Mrs. Abernathy's bridge club tournament, Amon's progress in his business classes. Ordinary conversation, unremarkable, except for how remarkable it felt to Amon. This was what Theodore had given him. Not just money, but the space to have moments like this. After breakfast, while Kira played in the backyard, Mrs. Abernathy helped Amon with the dishes. Theodore would be so pleased, she said quietly, looking out the window at Kira on the swing. This is exactly what he wanted. A family, a home filled with life and laughter. I think about him every day. Wonder if I'm doing it right. You are, dear. You're doing it exactly right. She dried a plate thoughtfully. You know, Theodore told me something once, maybe 10 years ago. He said, the measure of a man isn't what he accumulates, but what he gives and how he treats the people who can do nothing for him. You've been helping families quietly, haven't you? How did you know? She smiled. Small neighborhood, big heart. Word gets around. Patricia with the car repairs, the Johnson family's rent, that veteran's medical bills. People talk, even when they don't know who helped them. They sense it came from here. Theodore did it anonymously, and you're honoring that. But kindness has a way of making itself known, even when you try to hide it. That afternoon, Amon sat in the basement workshop, his workshop now, working on a project that had been forming in his mind for weeks. He was building a shadow box to display Theodore's pocket watch, along with the photograph of the 4 soldiers and a copy of the original salvage agreement. Not to show off, but to remember. To keep the story alive in this house, the watch still ticked, keeping perfect time after all these years. Amon held it, feeling its weight, its history. 4 young men in Belgium, making a choice in darkness to do something right. That choice had echoed across 80 years, through wars and peace, through poverty and wealth, finally reaching him and Kira. He thought about the note on the attic door, still there despite everything. Don't open the attic. He'd left it as a reminder. Not a warning anymore, but a symbol. A reminder that some doors, once opened, change everything. Upstairs the phone rang. Veronica's number. He answered. Amon, I have news. Preston filed for bankruptcy last month. Spent everything on the lawsuit, on investigators, on lawyers. His business, what little there was of it, collapsed. He's lost everything chasing a fantasy. Amon felt no satisfaction in it, only sadness. That's his great-grandfather's story repeating. Some people never learn. But I thought you should know. He can't bother you anymore. He's done. After hanging up, Amon climbed to the attic one last time. Not to take inventory or move anything, but to say goodbye to this chapter. The chests sat peaceful in the afternoon light from the skylight. The journals were arranged neatly on their shelf, everything in its place, just as Theodore had left it. Amon pulled out his phone and took a photograph, not of the treasure, but of the view from the attic window. Maple Street, quiet and tree-lined, ordinary houses holding extraordinary lives. He sent it to Veronica with a simple message. Home. Her response came quickly. Theodore knew. He descended the stairs for the last time, locked the attic door, and looked at the yellowed note. On impulse, he carefully removed it, took it downstairs to his workshop, and placed it in the shadow box he was building. Part of the story, part of the legacy. That evening, the 3 of them, Amon, Kira, and Mrs. Abernathy, sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint Maple Street in gold. Kira leaned against her father, content and drowsy. Mrs. Abernathy rocked slowly in Theodore's old chair that Amon had restored. You know what I love about this street? Mrs. Abernathy said softly. It's not fancy. Never has been. Just regular people living regular lives, trying to do their best. Theodore understood that. He could have lived anywhere, but he chose here. Chose ordinary. Chose quiet. Chose to help his neighbors instead of impressing strangers. That's what I want to teach Kira, Amon said. That the best life isn't the flashiest one. It's the one where you're kind, where you help others, where you appreciate what you have. She's learning it. Every day, watching you, she's learning it. Later, after Mrs. Abernathy went home and Kira was tucked into bed, Amon stood in the hallway, outside the attic door. The note was gone, but its message remained. Some warnings aren't about danger, they're about readiness. About making sure you're prepared for transformation. He'd opened that door 6 months ago, desperate and struggling. What he'd found had changed everything, not just his circumstances, but himself. He'd learned about integrity, about legacy, about using what you have to help others. He'd learned that wealth means nothing if you hoard it, everything if you share it. Most importantly, he'd learned that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't the ones you find, but the ones you become capable of recognizing, like the gift of time with your daughter, like the blessing of good neighbors, like the satisfaction of living with purpose instead of just surviving. The house settled around him, old boards creaking their familiar song. Somewhere in the walls, in the foundation, in the very bones of the structure, Theodore's presence lingered, not as a ghost, but as an echo of choices well made, of a life well lived. Amon touched the doorframe where the note had been, whispered a quiet thank you to the man he'd never met, and went downstairs to his own life, his own choices, his own chance to build something that would last. The attic door stood closed behind him, its secrets revealed, its purpose fulfilled. And on Maple Street, in a house that had witnessed 80 years of one man's quiet goodness, a new story was beginning, one of second chances, of inherited wisdom, and of the enduring truth that the best way to honor a gift is to become someone worthy of giving it forward. Some doors, once opened, close behind you. Others remain open forever, not as rooms you revisit, but as passages you've walked through to become someone new. Amon had walked through. And on the other side, he'd found not just treasure, but transformation. Not just wealth, but worth. Not just a house, but a home, and a legacy he'd spend the rest of his life honoring.